The lock clicked, but it wasn't the sound that stopped Caleb's heart. It was the stranger's voice, low and deliberate, saying, "It's a tight fit." Caleb froze, his hand on the bookstore's door, as the locksmith's eyes met his, sparking something reckless and alive. In that Seattle drizzle, under a street lamp's faltering glow, Caleb felt the world tilt toward a story he hadn't meant to write. Caleb Harper, 28, wasn't supposed to be here. His life was a curated checklist, a steady job at a graphic design firm, a tidy apartment in Capitol Hill, and a cautious heart that kept love at arm's length. Growing up in rural Georgia, he learned to hide his truth early: smiles for church, silence for survival. Being gay in a small town meant wearing a mask, and even now, in the progressive pulse of Seattle, he hadn't fully shed it. The bookstore, Pages of Pride, was his one rebellion, a sanctuary where he volunteered on weekends, shelving stories of lives braver than his own. Tonight, though, the front door's lock had jammed, trapping him after hours with a pile of unshelved queer lit and a growing sense of unease. He'd called the 24-hour locksmith on a whim, expecting a gruff handyman, not him. Isaiah Coleman stepped into the shop at 9 p.m., his presence filling the cramped space like a storm rolling in. Tall, with deep brown skin and a fade haircut sharp enough to cut through Caleb's composure, Isaiah carried himself with a quiet confidence. His locksmith's satchel clinked softly, but it was his eyes, warm, searching, unafraid, that pinned Caleb in place. "Got yourself locked in, huh?" Isaiah said, his voice a smooth baritone with a faint southern drawl that tugged at Caleb's roots. "Let's see what I can do." As Isaiah knelt to inspect the lock, Caleb leaned against a shelf, pretending to flip through a novel. His pulse raced, not from the lock, but from the way Isaiah's fingers moved, precise, steady, like he was unraveling a secret. The shop, usually a haven of ink and paper, felt electric, the air humming with something Caleb couldn't name. He caught himself staring, then looked away, cheeks burning. Get it together, he thought. This wasn't a rom-com. This was a Tuesday night, and the guy was just doing his job. But Isaiah wasn't just doing his job. He glanced up, catching Caleb's gaze, and grinned, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "You always stay this late. Or is this lock giving you an excuse to hang out with me?" The tease landed like a spark, and Caleb's laugh came out too loud, too quick. "Just dedicated to the cause," he managed, gesturing vaguely at the rainbow flag pinned above the counter. Isaiah's eyes followed, then returned to Caleb, softer now. "Good cause," he said, and the words felt like a bridge. They talked as Isaiah worked, the conversation flowing too easily. Isaiah was 30, a transplant from Alabama, where he'd grown up fixing things: cars, doors, hearts, he joked. He'd moved to Seattle for a fresh start, chasing a city that didn't flinch at who he was. "Back home, I was the guy you called to fix a lock, not the guy you invited to dinner," he said, his tone light, but laced with something heavier. Caleb nodded, recognizing the weight of a life lived in halves. He shared a piece of his own story: Georgia, the church pews, the years spent pretending. It was more than he'd told anyone in months, and it spilled out like it had been waiting for this moment. The lock gave way with a satisfying click, but neither man moved. Isaiah stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, and the space between them shrank. "Tight fit," he said again, but this time, his voice carried a different weight, like he was testing the air. Caleb's breath caught, and for a moment, they stood there, two strangers on the edge of something vast. The bookstore's warmth wrapped around them, but outside, the rain kept falling, blurring the world beyond the glass. Caleb didn't know it yet, but that night would rewrite his checklist. Isaiah wasn't just a locksmith. He was a key, and the door he'd unlock wasn't made of wood or steel. As they stepped into the drizzle, Caleb clutching his journal and Isaiah his tools, the city seemed to hum with possibility. They were two men who'd spent years fixing things for others, but tonight, they might just start fixing themselves. The rain didn't let up as Caleb and Isaiah stepped onto the sidewalk, the neon glow of Capitol Hill painting their faces in soft pinks and blues. Caleb's journal was tucked under his jacket, safe from the drizzle, but his thoughts were anything but protected. Isaiah's presence beside him felt like a live wire, sparking with every glance. "You hungry?" Isaiah asked, zipping up his hoodie. "There's a diner around the corner. My treat, since I saved your night." Caleb hesitated, his instinct to retreat warring with the pull of Isaiah's easy smile. He nodded before he could overthink it. The diner, a 24-hour spot called Moonlight Grill, was a relic of old Seattle. Checkered floors, vinyl booths, and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. They slid into a booth by the window, the glass fogging from their warmth. Over greasy burgers and too strong coffee, Caleb learned more about Isaiah. He wasn't just a locksmith. He was a poet who scribbled verses on receipts, a former foster kid who'd built a life from scraps. "I fix things because I know what it's like to be broken," Isaiah said, his eyes on his fries, and Caleb felt a pang, like a string in his chest had been plucked. Caleb shared his own fragments, his love for designing book covers, the way he'd sketch characters from the novels he read at Pages of Pride. He admitted he'd always wanted to write his own story, but never found the courage. "What's stopping you?" Isaiah asked, leaning forward, his gaze steady. Caleb shrugged, the weight of years of self-doubt pressing down. "It's hard to write when you're still figuring out who you are." Isaiah's hand brushed his across the table, a fleeting touch that sent heat up Caleb's arm. "Maybe you just need someone to read the first draft," Isaiah said, and Caleb's heart stuttered. They lingered until the waitress started giving them the side-eye, the clock ticking past midnight. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, and Isaiah walked Caleb back to his apartment, a few blocks away. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was alive, charged with questions neither dared ask yet. At Caleb's door, Isaiah paused, his breath visible in the cool air. "You ever need another lock fixed? Or, a coffee, call me." He handed Caleb a business card, his fingers lingering a second too long. Caleb watched him disappear into the night, the card burning a hole in his pocket. The next week was a blur. Caleb threw himself into work, designing a cover for a queer romance novel that hit too close to home. But Isaiah was a ghost in his thoughts, slipping into every quiet moment. He found himself doodling the man's name in the margins of his sketchpad, then scribbling it out, embarrassed. When his apartment's deadbolt started sticking, a cruel twist of fate, he didn't hesitate to call Isaiah. The locksmith arrived within the hour, his grin as disarming as ever. "You're keeping me in business, Harper," he teased, kneeling at the door. This time, the air crackled with intent. As Isaiah worked, Caleb leaned closer, asking about the tools, the process, anything to keep him talking. Isaiah explained, patient and warm, but his eyes kept finding Caleb's, and the room felt smaller with every glance. When the lock clicked open, Isaiah stood, closer than necessary. "You gotta stop getting stuck," he said, voice low, "or I'm gonna think you just like seeing me on my knees." Caleb's laugh was shaky, his face hot. He wanted to say something bold, but all he managed was, "Maybe I do." They didn't kiss, not yet, but the moment hung there, ripe and heavy. Isaiah left with a promise to check in, and Caleb spent the night staring at his journal, the blank pages taunting him. He wrote one line before bed. "He's a tight fit in my heart, and I don't know how to open the door." It was messy, raw, but it was a start. The city outside his window whispered of chances, and Caleb, for the first time in years, felt ready to listen. Caleb's apartment became a battlefield of doubt and desire in the days that followed. Isaiah's card sat on his kitchen counter, a silent challenge. He'd pick it up, trace the embossed letters, Coleman's lock and key, then set it down, afraid of what calling again might mean. But the sticking deadbolt wasn't the only thing that needed fixing. Caleb's life, so carefully ordered, was starting to feel like a lock he couldn't pick. At Pages of Pride, he found himself shelving books with titles like Love Unlocked and Out of the Shadows, each one a mirror he wasn't ready to face. Isaiah texted first, "A simple you surviving that lock?" That made Caleb's heart leap. They started messaging daily, small things at first, like Isaiah's bad puns about keys, or Caleb sharing a sketch he'd done of the bookstore's front window. But soon, the texts grew longer, deeper. Isaiah sent a photo of a poem he'd written on a napkin, about a man who carried a city in his chest. Caleb replied with a doodle of a key with wings, captioned, "For the guy who opens doors." It was flirting, undeniable, and it scared Caleb as much as it thrilled him. They met again at a community event at Pages of Pride, a poetry slam celebrating queer voices. Caleb volunteered to set up, arranging chairs and stringing fairy lights, but his eyes kept darting to the door. When Isaiah walked in, wearing a navy blazer and a nervous smile, Caleb nearly dropped a stack of programs. "Didn't know you were a poet and a locksmith," Caleb said, trying to sound casual. Isaiah shrugged, his eyes warm. Figured I'd try reading something. You inspired me. The words hit Caleb like a punch, soft but deep. Isaiah's poem was raw, a story of growing up black and queer in Alabama, of doors slammed shut and others pried open. The crowd snapped their fingers, but Caleb could barely breathe, each line carving into him. When Isaiah stepped off the stage, Caleb met him at the back of the room, words spilling out. That was incredible. Isaiah's smile was shy, unguarded. Wrote it thinking of you, he admitted, and Caleb felt the floor shift beneath him. They slipped outside, the night air cool against their flushed skin. Under the bookstore's awning, Isaiah reached for Caleb's hand, his thumb brushing over Caleb's knuckles. I don't do this, Isaiah said, voice low. I don't let people in. But you're different. Caleb wanted to say he felt the same, but fear clamped his throat. Instead, he squeezed Isaiah's hand, the gesture saying what words couldn't. They stood there, hands clasped, until the slam's music spilled out, pulling them back inside. The night ended with them sharing a slice of cake from a nearby bakery, sitting on a bench overlooking Puget Sound. Caleb told Isaiah about Georgia, about the boy who'd kissed him behind a barn at 16, only to deny it the next day. Isaiah listened, then shared his own story, a first love who'd left when Isaiah came out, unable to handle the weight of it. I thought I'd never try again, Isaiah said, staring at the water. But then I met you. Caleb's heart ached, not with pain, but with possibility. They parted with a hug that lingered, Isaiah's arms strong and certain. Caleb walked home alone, his journal heavy in his bag. That night, he wrote pages, words pouring out about a locksmith who unlocked more than doors. The story was taking shape, and so was he. But doubt lingered. Could he trust this feeling, or would it break him like before? The city's hum was louder now, urging him forward, but Caleb wasn't sure he was ready to answer. Caleb's world was splitting open, and Isaiah was the wedge. Their texts turned into late-night calls, voices soft through the phone as they shared dreams and fears. Caleb admitted he'd never been in a real relationship, too scared of being seen. Isaiah confessed he'd built walls higher than any lock he'd ever picked. But I'm trying, Caleb, he said one night, his voice crackling through the speaker. I want this. Us. The word us hung in Caleb's mind, a key he didn't know how to turn. They started meeting outside the bookstore, coffee at a hole-in-the-wall cafe, walks through Pike Place Market, where Isaiah bought Caleb a tiny key-shaped charm. For your story, he said, and Caleb's chest tightened. He wore it on a chain, hidden under his shirt, a secret promise. But the closer they got, the louder Caleb's doubts grew. He'd seen what happened when love went wrong, his cousin, disowned for coming out, his own heart, bruised at 16. What if Isaiah changed his mind? What if Caleb wasn't enough? The tension broke one evening at Isaiah's apartment, a small loft in Belltown filled with books and half-finished poems. Isaiah had invited Caleb over to cook dinner, a simple pasta dish that smelled like home. They laughed over spilled sauce, but when Isaiah reached to wipe a smudge from Caleb's cheek, the air shifted. Their eyes locked, and Isaiah leaned in, slow enough for Caleb to pull away. He didn't. The kiss was soft at first, then urgent, years of longing crashing together. Caleb's hands found Isaiah's shoulders, anchoring him in the moment. They pulled back, breathless, and Isaiah laughed, a sound that warmed the room. Told you it's a tight fit, he said, and Caleb grinned, the words now a private joke. But as they sat on the couch, tangled together, Caleb's fears crept in. What if this doesn't work, he whispered. Isaiah's hand found his, steady as ever. Then we fix it. That's what I do. Caleb wanted to believe him, but the weight of his past lingered. The next day, Caleb's boss assigned him a new project, a cover for a memoir about a gay couple's fight for acceptance. The story hit too close, and Caleb's sketches faltered, his lines shaky. He called Isaiah, voice trembling, and admitted he was scared. I've never let anyone this close, he said. Isaiah didn't push. He just listened, then asked Caleb to meet him at Pages of Pride that night. When Caleb arrived, Isaiah was waiting with a small notebook. Read this, he said, handing it over. It was a poem, titled For Caleb, about a man who carried a locked heart until a stranger showed him how to turn the key. Caleb's eyes stung, the words cutting through his fear. I wrote it for you, Isaiah said, his voice soft but sure. Because I'm not going anywhere. Caleb pulled him close, the notebook pressed between them. And for the first time, he believed in a future that didn't end in breaking. But the world wasn't done testing them. As they left the bookstore, a group of men loitered across the street, their voices loud and sharp. One shouted something ugly, a slur that sliced through the night. Caleb froze, his hand tightening in Isaiah's. The past rushed back. Georgia, the barn, the betrayal. Isaiah stepped forward, shielding Caleb, his voice calm but firm. "Keep walking," he told them, and they did, but the moment left a mark. Caleb realized love wasn't just a key, it was a fight, and he'd have to choose whether to stand or run. The slur echoed in Caleb's mind for days, a ghost that followed him through Seattle's streets. He and Isaiah kept meeting, their bond growing through quiet moments, a shared playlist, a late-night drive to see the city lights. But the incident outside the bookstore had cracked something open in Caleb, exposing a fear he thought he'd buried. He started pulling back, texting less, his replies clipped. Isaiah noticed, his messages gentle but probing. "You okay, Harper? Talk to me." Caleb wanted to, but the words felt locked inside. At work, Caleb's designs grew darker, his colors muted. His boss, a kind woman named Lena, pulled him aside. "You're not yourself," she said, her eyes searching. "Is it the memoir project?" Caleb shook his head, but the truth slipped out. He told her about Isaiah, the slur, the fear that love might come with a cost he couldn't pay. Lena listened, then handed him a proof of the memoir's cover. "Read it," she said. "It's about surviving worse than words." That night, Caleb did, and the story, of two men who fought for each other through hate and loss, stirred something in him. He called Isaiah, his voice shaking. "Can we talk?" In person, they met at a park near Lake Union, the water reflecting the city's glow. Caleb spilled everything, his fear of being hurt, of being seen, of losing the safety he'd built. Isaiah listened, his face unreadable, then took Caleb's hand. "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I'd rather face it with you than alone." They sat on a bench, the city humming around them, and Caleb felt a shift. He wasn't ready to run anymore. They spent the next weeks rebuilding trust. Isaiah invited Caleb to a lock-picking workshop he taught, a quirky side gig for extra cash. Caleb watched, mesmerized, as Isaiah showed a group of teens how to open a padlock with a hairpin. "It's about patience," Isaiah said, glancing at Caleb, "and knowing when to push." Afterward, they stayed late, practicing on an old lock. When Caleb finally got it open, Isaiah cheered, pulling him into a hug that felt like home. But the world kept pushing back. At a bar one night, a stranger muttered something as they danced, close and unafraid. Isaiah brushed it off, but Caleb saw the tension in his jaw. Later, in the quiet of Isaiah's loft, Caleb asked, "How do you keep going when people hate what we are?" Isaiah was quiet for a long time, then said, "I fix things. Locks, poems, me. And now us." He knelt in front of Caleb, not with a ring, but with a promise. "I'm in this, tight fit and all. You with me?" Caleb nodded, tears falling, and pulled Isaiah up into a kiss that felt like a vow. The memoir project was approved, Caleb's cover a hit. He showed it to Isaiah, proud but nervous. Isaiah traced the design, a silhouette of two men under a street lamp, hands clasped. "This is us," he said, and Caleb smiled, realizing it was. The city outside was still loud, still messy, but Caleb was learning to hear its music. He wrote more, his journal filling with a story of two men who didn't just survive, but thrived. The lock was open, but the real work was just beginning. Caleb's journal was no longer blank. It was a map of his heart, inked with Isaiah's name. They were a couple now, navigating the messy beauty of love. They cooked together, argued over movie choices, and stole kisses in the stacks at Pages of Pride. But the world outside their bubble wasn't always kind. At a Pride event, a protester's sign, "Love is a sin," cut Caleb deeper than he expected. Isaiah pulled him close, whispering, "They don't get to define us." Caleb nodded, but the words lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. They decided to face the shadows together. Isaiah suggested they volunteer at a local queer youth center, a place that helped kids like the ones they'd been, scared, hiding, hopeful. Caleb was nervous, unsure he had anything to offer. But watching Isaiah teach a teen how to pick a lock, using it as a metaphor for opening up, Caleb found his role. He started an art workshop, teaching kids to draw their stories. One boy, a quiet 15-year-old named Marcus, sketched a rainbow key, his hands shaking. "It's for my dad," he said. "He doesn't know yet." Caleb's throat tightened, seeing himself in Marcus's eyes. Helping the kids grounded them, but it also exposed their differences. Isaiah was bold, unafraid to call out hate when he saw it. Caleb was quieter, his instinct to retreat still strong. One night, after a tense debate at the center about how to handle bigoted parents, they argued. "You can't keep hiding," Isaiah said, frustration in his voice. "Not from them, not from me." Caleb snapped back. "I'm not hiding. I'm surviving." The words hung heavy, and Isaiah left to cool off, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. He walked to the bookstore, seeking solace in its shelves. There, he found a novel about two men who fought for their love against a world that didn't understand. It wasn't just a story, it was a mirror. Caleb texted Isaiah, an apology and an invitation. They met at the diner, the same booth as their first night. "I'm trying," Caleb said, his voice raw. "But I need you to be patient." Isaiah took his hand, his eyes soft. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll fix this together." They did. They started couples counseling, a suggestion from Lena, who'd become a mentor to Caleb. The sessions were hard, peeling back layers of fear and pride. But they also laughed, shared dreams, and planned a future. Isaiah wanted to open his own locksmith shop. Caleb dreamed of publishing his story. They were building something, not just fixing what was broken. One night, after a long day at the youth center, they sat on Isaiah's balcony, the city sprawling below. Caleb pulled out his journal, reading a new passage aloud, a scene where two men danced under a street lamp, unafraid. Isaiah listened, then kissed him, slow and sure. "That's our story," he said. Caleb nodded, realizing it was true. The city's hum was their soundtrack now, and they were writing the next verse together. The seasons turned, and so did Caleb and Isaiah. A year after that rainy night at Pages of Pride, they stood together at the bookstore's anniversary party, surrounded by friends, volunteers, and the kids from the youth center. Caleb's cover for the memoir was framed on the wall, a symbol of his growth. Isaiah's poetry chapbook, dedicated to Caleb, sat on a shelf nearby. The room buzzed with laughter, but Caleb felt a quiet pride. They'd built this, together. Their love wasn't perfect. They still argued, still stumbled over old wounds. But they'd learned to fix what broke, to talk through the hard moments. When a local politician pushed anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, they marched together, Caleb's hand in Isaiah's, their voices loud. When Marcus, the teen from the youth center, came out to his dad and was met with silence, they sat with him, offering the family they'd found in each other. One evening, as they walked through Capitol Hill, Isaiah stopped under the same street lamp where they'd met. The drizzle was back, a soft echo of that first night. He knelt, not with a ring, but with a key, a real one, polished and tied with a ribbon. "This is for our place," he said, voice steady. "I found a shop with an apartment above it. We could live there, build our dreams." Caleb's eyes filled, the weight of the moment sinking in. He took the key, his fingers brushing Isaiah's, and nodded. "Let's make it fit." They moved in a month later, the shop below becoming Coleman's Lock and Key, and the apartment above their home. Caleb's journal became a manuscript, a novel about two men who found love in a world that didn't always make space for it. He sent it to publishers, his heart pounding with every submission. When the first acceptance came, Isaiah was there, cheering louder than anyone. The night they signed the lease, Isaiah knelt again, this time with words. "You're my home, Caleb. Tight fit and all." Caleb laughed through tears, pulling him up. They kissed under the street lamp, the city their witness. The key in Caleb's pocket felt like more than metal. It was a promise, a future, a story they'd write together. Their love wasn't just a spark anymore. It was a flame, steady and bright. They'd faced hate, doubt, and fear, but they'd also found joy, community, and purpose. Caleb looked at Isaiah, his locksmith, his poet, his home, and knew they'd unlocked something rare. The world would keep turning, with its slurs and shadows, but they'd keep fixing, keep fighting, keep loving. And under Seattle's endless rain, that was enough.